"You're nothing but a disgrace to this uniform," Catherine roared, her manicured hand yanking the epaulet clean off my dress blues. The seam ripped with a sharp, ugly sound that cut through the country club patio like a gunshot. My jacket sagged open, exposing the plain white undershirt beneath, and every board member, every donor, every retired colonel holding a champagne flute turned to stare. My future mother-in-law stood there with the torn fabric dangling from her fingers like a hunting trophy, her lips curled into a satisfied sneer. My fiancé's father, Gerald, chuckled into his scotch. My own sister, Vanessa, filmed the whole thing on her phone, angling it for a better shot of my humiliation. I didn't flinch. I didn't reach for the torn jacket. I stood perfectly still, letting the warm evening air hit the bare skin of my collarbone, where a thin silver scar caught the last light of sunset. And that's when the laughter stopped. A woman in a sharp navy blazer near the bar set down her glass so hard it cracked. She was already moving, cutting through the crowd like she'd been trained to clear a room, her eyes locked on that scar like she'd seen it before. Behind her, two men in dark suits went rigid, hands rising to their earpieces. Nobody at that party understood what they were actually looking at. Before I tell you what that scar means, hit like and subscribe if you're the kind of person who's ever had to prove your worth to people who never deserve to test you. Drop where you're watching from in the comments. I read every single one. 72 hours before my jacket was torn off my back, I pulled my 10-year-old Corolla into the gravel lot of the Brightwood Country Club, the muffler announcing my arrival louder than any butler could. The valet, a kid in a red vest, looked at my dented bumper and then at the line of Bentleys behind me like I'd parked a shopping cart in a luxury showroom. I didn't wait for him. I grabbed my duffel bag from the trunk and walked myself in. Inside, the ballroom smelled like money orchids flown in from somewhere expensive, top-shelf bourbon, and the particular perfume that costs more than my monthly rent. This was the Whitfield family's engagement dinner, thrown in honor of my fiancé, Daniel, and me. Except nothing about the room felt like it was thrown in my honor. My name wasn't on the seating chart at all. I found it eventually, handwritten in tight, resentful cursive at a card table wedged between the kitchen doors and the coat check. Catherine Whitfield's doing, obviously. She'd never wanted her golden son marrying a girl from Ohio who grew up working weekends at her uncle's auto shop. Daniel found me standing there, staring at the card table setup, and had the decency to look ashamed. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "My mother handles the seating." I told him it was fine. It wasn't, but I'd learned a long time ago that surviving a room like this meant picking your battles, and this wasn't the one. My sister Vanessa arrived 20 minutes later on the arm of some hedge fund associate, wearing a dress that cost more than my last paycheck, and made a beeline for the Whitfields' table instead of mine. Vanessa had always known which way the wind blew. She air-kissed Catherine's cheek and settled in like she'd been born into old money instead of the same cracked linoleum kitchen I had. I sat at my little table near the kitchen doors and ate in silence, while a string quartet played somewhere behind me. And Gerald Whitfield gave a toast about legacy and family values that never once mentioned my name. Around 9, the dinner shifted into what Catherine called getting to know the new addition properly, which turned out to mean a private tour of Gerald's pride and joy, the club's tactical range, a converted barn out past the tennis courts, where Gerald hosted corporate team-building weekends for defense contractors who wanted to feel like operators for an afternoon. Half the guest list followed us out there with their drinks still in hand, treating it like dinner theater. Gerald handed me a rifle, like he was daring me to drop it. "Daniel mentioned you're in the service," he said, loud enough for the crowd behind him to hear, his tone dripping with performance. "Logistics, was it? Something with paperwork?" I said supply chain operations, and he smiled like I'd confirmed exactly what he wanted to hear. "We've got some real shooters here today, sweetheart. Former Rangers, a couple SEALs. Don't feel bad if this isn't your world." I didn't answer. I looked at the rifle in my hands, an old Franken-built AR that someone in that crowd clearly thought was for show, and something in my chest went very quiet and very still. Catherine appeared at Gerald's shoulder, arms crossed, watching me with the specific hunger of a woman who had been waiting all night for exactly this moment. "Daniel, get your girl a juice box," one of the guests laughed. Vanessa laughed loudest of all. I set the rifle down on the bench in front of me. I didn't rush. I didn't perform. I looked past the crowd to the dark tree line at the edge of the range and let my hands do what 4 years of muscle memory had already burned into them. "Field strip," I said. "Full breakdown, full reassembly. Someone want to time it? Gerald laughed and pulled out his phone, more amused than concerned. Go ahead, he said, humor thick in his voice, like he was indulging a child. My hands moved before he finished the sentence. Charging handle back, lock the bolt, drop the takedown pins, separate the upper and lower. My fingers knew the geometry without needing my eyes, the exact weight of the bolt carrier group, the specific resistance of the cam pin sliding free. I laid each piece on the bench in a clean, silent row. No wasted motion, no hesitation, while the crowd's laughter slowly died into confused silence behind me. Reassembly went faster. Bolt into the carrier, cam pin seated, firing pin dropped and locked, carrier group slid home with a solid click. I racked the charging handle, dry-fired to check function, and set the weapon down flat on the bench. 29 seconds, Gerald said, and his voice had lost every ounce of performance. He was staring at his phone like it had lied to him. A man near the back, one of the actual former operators, Gerald, had bragging rights to step forward, mouth slightly open. Where'd you learn to do that fast? He asked, forgetting entirely that he was supposed to be impressed by his host, not by me. Supply chain operations, I said flatly, and walked back toward the crowd. Catherine's smile had curdled into something tight and furious. Beginner's luck, she said. Gerald cleared his throat and, unwilling to lose face in front of his guests, gestured toward the 400-meter line. Let's see if luck holds at distance. I didn't ask for a rifle. I didn't ask for a scope check. I picked up the bolt action sitting on the rack, dropped into position in the dirt without being told, and settled my breathing the way I'd been trained to 1,000 times over. The world narrowed down to the rise and fall of my own chest, the faint tremor of wind on exposed grass 400 meters out, and a single paper target that everyone else in that crowd assumed I had no business hitting. I fired once. The impact flag on the spotting scope jumped dead center. The range went silent, except for the wind. Somewhere behind me, a woman I didn't recognize, the one in the sharp navy blazer, one of Gerald's corporate guests. I'd assumed lowered her own drink very slowly and stared at the target through a pair of field glasses, like she couldn't quite process what she'd just watched a stranger in borrowed range gear do without blinking. Catherine's patience, whatever thin thread of it remained, snapped completely. If she couldn't break me with humiliation, she'd try something older and uglier. She turned to Daniel's cousin Marcus, a broad-shouldered ex-college linebacker who'd spent the whole dinner flexing for anyone who'd look, and murmured something in his ear. Marcus rolled his shoulders and stepped onto the range mat that had been laid out earlier for the team-building demonstrations Gerald loved so much. Catherine's voice carried across the crowd, sweet and venomous at once. Marcus does some grappling. Why don't you two have a little fun? Show everyone what real training looks like versus paperwork training. I looked at my mother-in-law's triumphant face, and then at Daniel, who opened his mouth to object and was silenced by a single, sharp look from his father. Gerald wanted his show. He was going to get one either way. Marcus outweighed me by at least 80 pounds, all of it gym-built, none of it functional. He grinned at the small crowd gathering around the mat like he was already being congratulated. Catherine stood at the front row with her arms crossed and a slow, approving nod, the same look she'd worn all night, the look of a woman who believed cruelty was simply good parenting. Go easy on her, Gerald called out, and the crowd laughed again, and something in me went colder and quieter than it had all evening. Marcus lunged first, grabbing for my collar the way a man grabs something he's certain won't grab back. I let him get exactly as close as I needed him to. When his weight committed forward, overconfident and flat-footed, I pivoted off my back foot, dropped my hips under his extended arm, and used his own momentum to fold him over my shoulder and down onto the mat with a heavy, flat thud that knocked the wind clean out of him. The crowd's laughter died mid-breath. Marcus scrambled up, face red, ego bruised worse than his back, and came at me again, wild this time, sloppy. I stepped offline, caught his wrist, and turned my hips, and this time I didn't let him hit the mat clean. I locked his arm out straight against my hip, applying just enough pressure to make the message unmistakable without breaking anything that couldn't be forgiven. Tap or don't, I said quietly. Your choice. He tapped, twice, loud enough for everyone behind him to hear the slap of his palm against the mat. Catherine's face had gone the color of raw dough. Vanessa had stopped filming. Daniel looked like a man watching his entire understanding of the world quietly rearrange itself in front of him. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Gerald, red-faced and humiliated in front of the exact crowd he'd assembled to be humiliated in front of, needed someone to blame that wasn't his own arrogance. He turned to Catherine. and Catherine turned to the one lever she had left, my uniform. She crossed the mat in 4 furious strides, grabbed the collar of my dress jacket, the one I'd worn specifically because Daniel asked me to, because he was proud of it, because for one night I'd let myself believe that pride might matter to his family too, and she yanked. The seam gave. Fabric tore. My jacket sagged open across my shoulders, exposing the thin white undershirt beneath and, just above my collarbone, a narrow silver scar I usually kept covered out of habit, not shame. "You're an embarrassment in that uniform," Catherine hissed. Loud enough for the whole patio to hear now, loud enough that even the caterers stopped moving. My son deserves someone with an actual future, not some enlisted nobody playing dress-up in a costume she barely earned. I didn't reach for the torn jacket. I didn't cover the scar. I stood there and let the evening air hit my collarbone and let every single person on that patio see exactly what they'd spent the whole night mocking. That's when the woman in the navy blazer set her glass down hard enough to crack the stem and started walking. She moved through that crowd the way water moves through a broken dam, fast, direct, unstoppable, her eyes locked on the scar above my collar like she'd read a file on it. The 2 men near the bar, who I'd assumed were somebody's overpaid security detail, were suddenly not drinking anymore, hands rising toward their earpieces, positioning themselves at the edges of the patio with the kind of practiced calm that has nothing to do with corporate event security. Catherine, still holding a fistful of my torn jacket, blinked at the sudden shift in the room like she'd missed a cue. The woman stopped 2 feet in front of me. Up close, the navy blazer wasn't corporate at all. It was cut for movement, not fashion. And the small pin on her lapel wasn't jewelry. "Sergeant First Class Reyes," she said. And it wasn't a question, it was a confirmation. The kind of thing you say when you already know the answer and just need to hear it out loud. "Ghost River, 2nd rotation." That's not just a scar. That's a Silver Star citation wearing civilian skin. The patio went dead silent except for the string quartet, still playing, oblivious, somewhere behind us. Catherine's grip on my jacket loosened like her fingers had forgotten how to hold anything. Gerald's champagne-flushed face drained the color right out of it. "I want to know why nobody at this club," she said, turning to face the stunned crowd of donors and executives. "Why not one of you recognized what an actual combat decoration looks like before you decided it would be funny to strip it off her shoulders in public?" Somebody, I don't remember who, whispered the word "Ghost River" like it meant something, and across the patio, 3 older men in blazers, guests I'd barely noticed all evening, set down their drinks at the same time, expressions shifting from polite party faces to something much harder, much older. I did not gloat, I did not smile. I reached down, picked up the torn jacket that had fallen from Catherine's slack fingers, and draped it back over my own shoulders, covering the scar the same way I'd covered it for 2 years, out of habit, not because anyone in that family had earned the right to see it and then mock it. Daniel stepped toward me, stunned, hurt, trying to find footing on ground that had just been pulled out from under him. "You never told me," he said, and it wasn't an accusation, just a man realizing how little he actually knew about the woman he was supposed to marry. "I told you I did logistics work overseas," I said quietly. "I never lied to you. I just never corrected what you assumed, because the moment people find out, they stop seeing you and start seeing the story. I wanted one relationship where I wasn't a story first." Reyes turned to the crowd, her voice carrying the particular flatness of someone who has said hard things to important people before and stopped caring how it landed. Sergeant First Class Alicia Marsh pulled 2 of her squad out of a collapsed structure under direct fire during an operation most of you will never read about because it's still classified. She earned that scar keeping other people's sons alive, and your family spent the evening calling her a costume. Catherine's mouth opened and closed twice, with nothing coming out. Gerald, desperate to reclaim some scrap of the evening he'd spent all night curating, cleared his throat and tried, weakly, for a joke. "Well," he said, laughing without any humor left in it, "I suppose drinks are on the house tonight then." Nobody laughed with him. I looked at Vanessa, who still had her phone in her hand, the recording light long since switched off. Her face, doing the particular math of a person realizing the footage she'd captured for mockery, had just become something else entirely. I looked at Catherine, still holding a torn piece of fabric she no longer knew what to do with. I looked at Marcus, sitting on the edge of the mat, rubbing his shoulder, saying nothing at all. I felt strangely calm. Not vindicated, exactly. Just finished. "The anger I do have," I said, "isn't about the jacket. Fabric tears. It's about every single person on this patio who watched a grown woman get physically stripped in public and decided the polite thing to do was keep drinking. That tells me everything I need to know about what kind of family this actually is. Catherine found her voice again, thin and brittle. You can't just, she started, and I cut her off, not with anger, just with certainty. I can, I said, and I am. I turned to Daniel. I do love you, I told him, and I meant it, which somehow made the rest of the sentence harder to say. But I've spent 2 years watching you go quiet every time your mother needs someone smaller to feel powerful over. Tonight, it was me. Eventually, it would have been our kids. I can't build a life inside a family that only respects people they're afraid of. Daniel didn't argue. That was, in its own way, the saddest part. He just stood there, jaw tight, torn between the mother who raised him and the woman he'd asked to marry him, and said nothing at all. And in the silence, I already had my answer. Reyes touched my shoulder, light, brief, professional. Command wants a debrief on the citation leak, she said quietly, just to me. But that can wait until tomorrow. Tonight, let's get you out of this parking lot. I nodded. I didn't look back at the patio full of people who, 20 minutes earlier, had laughed while a woman tore a decorated soldier's jacket off her back for the crime of not coming from money. I walked past the tennis courts, past the gravel lot where my dented Corolla sat wedged between 2 Bentleys like an insult someone had forgotten to remove, and I heard Catherine's voice cracking behind me, suddenly desperate, suddenly small. Wait, she called out. We didn't know. How could we have known? I stopped at the edge of the lot and turned around one last time. You didn't need to know what the scar meant, I said. You needed to treat people decently before you found out whether they were important enough to deserve it. That's the part you failed. Not tonight. Every night before it. Gerald opened his mouth, some final attempt at damage control already forming, and I didn't wait to hear it. I got in my car, the muffler coughing loud and unapologetic in the quiet gravel lot, and I drove off the property without a single glance in the rearview mirror. Family isn't the people who claim you when it's convenient and discard you when it's not. It's the people who stand beside you before they know what you're worth on paper and stay standing there after. You do not owe your dignity to anyone who only offers you respect after they've been frightened into it. If you've ever had to walk away from people who valued your usefulness over your humanity, I want you to know that leaving isn't weakness. It's the first act of self-respect you've allowed yourself in years. Tell me where you're watching from tonight. Hit like and subscribe if you believe silence is the loudest answer you can give the people who never deserved an explanation. Stay strong and never let anyone rip away what you've earned.